Okay, well, it seems like you guys enjoyed my last video regarding workshop tips, so I'll give you a few more. Tip 1: don't put your tea on machinery tables. Why? Because that's a blinking great lump of cast iron and me tea's cold. Go in any machine shop and you'll see this arrangement, very common. Holding down materials, work holding. It's an interesting subject and one that I quite like. Whether you're holding work on a milling table, drilling table, lathe, shaper, whatever. You see all sorts of arrangements. Even you know, the pros get it a bit wrong sometimes. You can use all sorts of adjustable jacks, and I've got many of them. You make them up for different jobs. There's many different fittings for holding things down to the table. But inevitably, if you have a look at, as I say, most machine shops, you'll see the tray full of swarf, the odd spanner or two, bits of shims, all sorts of things, and depending on the job, I mean, this is a simple square, that could go in the vise, but if it was more complicated, we find different fittings to hold it down, bits of shim. We've all done it, I'm guilty, we're all guilty. But despite all these fittings, as I say, you're forever finding the washer to give you level or something. So just take 5 minutes off and actually make yourself something to reduce all this packing business. I've taken several sections of just strip and I put a nut and bolt through them, countersink on one end, and it's nothing more than sort of giant feeler gauges, if you like. So if we want packing, all you have to do is dial up the size that you want, and then you have the exact height. Make up a couple of those, will save you a lot of hassle. In the beginning I was setting up my drill press table with the aid of a test piece, a torch and a square, to ensure that the table was at right angles to the axis of the drill. But how do we know the square's square? Take nothing for granted. There's no names on it. No one's proud enough to say I made it, so it could be Far Eastern rubbish. It isn't, but it could be. So a simple way to test it is to find a piece of aluminium and a known straight edge and a very fine point. Scribe a mark. Turn the square over. Draw a second line, about 30 away from the first one. Now you should have two parallel lines. Will the camera pick it up? Yeah, just about. Any discrepancy between those two lines will be magnified by a factor of 2. I never charge for what I do, which is why I'm always skint. But I do work on the basis of quid pro quo, and a local farmer gave me a hand moving me boat once, so I said I'd give him a hand, and he had some agricultural equipment left out in the field for a couple of years. Everything was sort of seized up, nuts and bolts were rusty. So I said I'd give him a hand. And I went out there with some penetrating oil and wire brushes, and we freed up some nuts and bolts and got the thing sort of working again. But I didn't know what to expect, and whilst I could clean bolts and threaded parts with a wire brush, I had no means of cleaning in the threads. I didn't have a tap that I could run through and clean them out. But he had a rudimentary workshop, and he had a few bolts that were spare of the size, so we took one of the bolts and we filed a flat on it, so I can get in close. And if you machine, file, grind that shape, you'll find it really handy for cleaning out the rust in threaded sections. While I have the camera pointed at my milling machine, you can see I have a very nice machine vise bolted to the table. And you'll notice I've made up some plywood covers to cover up the rest of the table. This saves a lot of hassle cleaning swarf out of the T-slots. If you're machining work between centres on a lathe, and here I have a live centre in the lathe, the live centre, the actual centre goes round with the work, so there's no friction at this point. And we have bearings within the angular this way and a thrust also. So we can exert quite a bit of compressive loading in that direction, which is handy if we wish to machine multiple small items, simply held in place by compression. No such thing can take place if we use a dead centre. There is some that argue that a dead centre can be more accurate. Well, I'm not going to go into that arrangement. But a lot of the old lathes have dead centres, such as this. But the disadvantage here is that we have friction at this point because the dead centre remains stationary and the work goes round. So we give it some lubrication here, right? Well, that's fine, but if you put on too much, it flies all over the shop. If you don't put enough on, you're forever coming back and re-oiling again. So my little tip here is get yourself a little piece of felt and some old scissors and cut yourself a little patch, no bigger than that, place it in there. Now you've got a patch between your centre and your work. Let me lock that off. There you go. Now if we apply oil either side of the patch, give it a minute to soak in other words it's a wick, and then upon starting the lathe, if we just simply advance the tailstock just a smidgen, you will find that any heat generated here will change the viscosity of the oil, and it will be pulled in by capillary action into the interface. And the advantage of this little wick arrangement is that you will probably have sufficient oil at this point to outlast the job. If, like me, you use a lot of sandpaper, I don't know why we call it sandpaper, I don't use sand anymore, but an abrasive paper, and I buy mine in rolls. You'd probably cut it up with one of those things, an old Stanley knife or perhaps an old pair of scissors. Well, it don't do them much good, does it? The edge don't last too long, so a far better way is to take an old hacksaw blade and screw it to the end of a piece of wood and let it sort of stick up about no more than a 1/16, and you'll find it so easy to take your sheet, whatever size you want, and you've got a nice straight edge. So much easier than the scissors. Finally, supposing you want to copy some weird shape or moulding or other, well, you can take one of these tools. They're quite handy, they're made up of little fingers, and it's simply pushed onto and it takes up the shape, and then you can draw this out. Ideal for fitting carpets and all this sort of thing. Well, if you don't have one of those, then they're very handy. It's a bit more fiddly, but you can take a pack of cards and you push down on a pack of cards. You'll also get that profile, as you can see, so we can draw around there and get our shape. That's a good trick. Get it?